A Swift Kick to the Thorax by Mara Lynn Johnston. Of all the things I expected to find under a hedge on an alien world, a rabbit didn't even make the list. Rabbits weren't allowed. Cats and dogs were barely allowed, and that was with all the screening, breeding, and training that Earth could muster. Nothing from our planet was going to cause problems for our new trade partners. Nothing except for this rabbit, doing its best to hide among the greenery as if it didn't stick out like a cotton ball in a salad. It was even a fluffy Angora breed, all wispy white fur with a dark face and feet, like it was wearing a sweater. This was a high-maintenance pet. It did not belong here. Judging by the fast breathing and the whites showing around its eyes, it knew that as well as I did. "Can you catch it?" asked one of the turtle-dillo children behind me. The two of them were watching from a distance, worried that it was dangerous. They had flagged me down on my way to lunch, reasoning that the best person to deal with an alien on the loose was another alien. "I should be able to," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "These little guys are fast and this one looks scared. It won't hurt you." I shifted position to reach farther into the cool shade. No smell of rabbit pee yet, just good clean dirt. "It might bite me since I'm the one going after it, but that wouldn't even get through your armor." The turtle-dillos, properly called rockbacks, though earthlings agree they resemble an armadillo-turtle cross, shifted uneasily on scaly feet, each clutching their four hands together into anxious bundles. Their turtly beaks were shut tightly on the many other questions I'm sure they had. These two were probably siblings, given the identical size, mannerisms, and similar whirls of lavender paint on their shells. I would have liked to ask their names and introduce myself properly. "Robin Bennett, human extraordinaire and earth animal expert, what can I do for you?" But there was a higher priority right now. "Hey there, Bunny," I cooed in English. "Let's go somewhere safe, yeah?" It kicked up its heels and was gone in a spray of leaves. "Ah!" I crawled backwards out of the hedge, ducking low to keep my braid from getting stuck on the rough twigs. "Or you could make me chase you. Just what I wanted to do." Switching back to rockback as I stood to my full height, I asked the kids, "Can you stand by the gate and make sure it doesn't get out?" They vowed to guard it well, making a four-handed salute and standing as tall as they could, not even waist height on me, before scampering off toward the gate. I wished them luck and began cheating at the hedge maze. The rectangular shrubbery reminded me of a boxwood from my grandma's neighborhood, just trimmed for a shorter species who didn't want to get completely lost. And something low enough for a turtle-dillo to see over is easy for a 6-foot-tall human woman to step over. Not entirely dignified, mind you, but easy. I made a series of long-legged hops in the direction the rabbit had gone, eyes searching for flashes of white. Nothing. I changed tactics and dashed for the low stone wall at the edge of the maze. With a vault I was proud of, I landed on top of it to survey the maze. Exclamations of surprise came from the turtle-dillo pedestrians on the other side. They'd just seen one of the tall aliens appear out of nowhere, which had to be startling. With my pale skin, brown hair, and greeny-beige work clothes, I was a normal enough sight back home, but the strangest of beings here, especially crouching on top of a wall like this. "Sorry," I said. "Don't mind me, just needed to get a better view. Have a good day." With a cheery wave, I stood up and made a show of peering out over the hedge maze that passed for a public park. Hover cars puttered by. Distant honks echoed from further out in the city, more lower-pitched than the ones back home. Warm sunlight and a gentle breeze were more Earth-like than they had any right to be, right down to the faint smell of seaweed drifting in from the bay. This capital city was a lovely place, except for one troublesome rabbit. There, a tuft of white. Way the heck over on the other side already. I took off jogging along the wall, which prompted more surprised chatter from the pedestrians. Then when I reached a connecting pathway, I jumped down. The rabbit heard me coming and thus began a merry chase. It was fast, like only a terrified prey animal can be, skittering across paving stones and twisting to dive through thin spots in the hedge. It left bits of silky fur on some of the twigs. I hated to scare it like this, but if I waited for it to calm down, I might never find it. And I was so sure I could grab it. I kept being wrong. The lunge that got the closest was near the sidewall of the maze, which was wooden instead of the stone that lined the street. It was a strange kind of wood, as so many things here were, looking like enormous brown blades of grass that had been transmogrified into wooden planks. They overlapped instead of fitting perfectly side by side. There was a gap at the bottom just the size for a rabbit to fit through. "No, no, no, dang it! Come back here and let me rescue you!" I stopped, winded. The rabbit ignored me. Well, fine. This wall was higher than the other one, but nothing I couldn't handle. I considered jogging back toward the street and trying to enter from there, but I liked my odds with this crooked tree better. It was right up against the fence, along with others providing shade, and its trunk tilted at the perfect angle for running up. Never one to turn down an opportunity for parkour on a workday, I went for it, and was among the branches in seconds. The view on the other side of the fence held an open courtyard with scattered tables, chairs, and surprised turtledillos eating lunch. I waved again. "Hi there. Did a small, fluffy animal just run by here?" Many three-fingered hands pointed away from the fence. Several voices asked if it was dangerous. "Nope, just scared and fast. Excuse me." I got my feet over the fence and dropped to land carefully, collapsing like an accordion and slapping the ground to disperse momentum away from my joints. I hadn't injured myself, and I hadn't stepped in anyone's food. Full marks. And it gave the locals an exciting story to tell, which was always a plus. I sprang up, rubbing my stinging palms, and trotted in the direction they'd indicated. This led to another branch of the outdoor eatery, where the air was spicy with the smell of foods made for people who ate a lot of bugs, a familiar scent by now. The turtledillos here were eager to direct me further. I repeated my assurance that they didn't need to fear for their safety. I privately hoped that this was the only mysterious animal around and that I wasn't lying to them. What was the rabbit doing here? Answers would have to wait. Capture first. I followed the pointing claws toward the closest thing to a dark corner, behind a pair of trash cans. I approached quietly, crouching to look for the white fur. Yep, there it was, holding perfectly still and hyperventilating something fierce, with its face pressed into a corner as if that would hide it better. Poor thing. The cans smelled like rotten, spicy bug food, too, which surely made the experience worse. I gently leaned a knee against the trash can on the left so the rabbit couldn't wriggle past, then dove between the cans to get a double fistful of wild fur. The rabbit bucked and kicked in my hands, but I managed to wrap it in my shirt and hold it close. It huddled against my chest with its heart beating wildly. I spoke the traditional soothing words of my people. There, you're okay. Good bunny. Please don't pee on me. Let's get you home." When I got to my feet, the air filled with hearty applause, which sounds different coming from scaly hands. I bobbed my head in body language that was close enough to a bow for either culture, and I reminded them that they were safe. "I'd better get this guy some rest after all the excitement. Enjoy your meals." They thanked me, and I left feeling like a hero. The rabbit cooperated, despite flinching at a loud hover truck engine on the road. I took the sidewalk back instead of trying to climb the fence with my arms full. It was a short enough walk. I'd swing by the front entrance of the maze to tell the kids that I'd caught it, then cross the street and leg it back to base. The kids saw me coming. They ran up all excited like I'd expected, but instead of asking to see the exotic earth animal, they said something else. "More of them," they said, pointing back into the maze. "Lots more." "Show me," I said, with my grip firm on the rabbit. The alien kids hurried back in the other direction, and I followed on my long human legs. The rabbit pressed its head into the crook of my arm, like that could shut out the world. I tried to walk gently. The kids led the way into the park, past the entrance to the maze portion, and farther onto a wide meadow. The grass was sky blue and smelled faintly of cinnamon, but otherwise it was a familiar kind of lovely, and it was full of rabbits. The kids tried to whisper, but the rabbits heard them anyway. Ears popped up across the meadow, even in places that I didn't think they could have reached, and in an instant, the quiet scene transformed into a stampeding herd of hind feet and fluffy tails. Then they were gone into the underbrush. "Hoo boy," I muttered, sniffing the cinnamon-scented breeze. Could the rabbits eat alien grass safely? Had they already tried? The kids apologized for startling the herd, rattling the claws of their lower hands against leg scales in agitation and spreading their upper hands in a placating gesture. "It's okay," I said in their language. "Thank you for telling me about this. I'll go get some people to catch them all. If you want to help more, you can stay and try to keep them from going out into the maze." The kids jumped at the chance, insisting that they had nowhere else important to be. I wondered about that, given their age, but I'll admit I had bigger worries on my mind. Their next assertion helped. "The rest of the family is meeting us here soon. They can help too." "Excellent," I told them. "Fantastic. Remember that they won't bite you unless they feel like they're trapped in a corner, and they run very fast. I'll be back as soon as I can." I made my exit. The first rabbit still held close, and I spent a moment being glad the meadow was near to where I worked. Then I spent a longer moment being worried, because it would look suspicious enough to have a swarm of escaped Earth animals somewhere on the planet, much less within hopping distance of the Earth Embassy. We didn't have any rabbits to lose. Where had they come from, and was it designed to make us look bad? Because it definitely would. And what are we going to do if we can't catch them all? I thought as I speed walked. I knew full well what kind of havoc a bunch of rabbits could wreak on an ecosystem, especially if they were capable of making more baby rabbits. Every animal brought here through the official channels had been sterilized and screened for all possible ailments. I went down the list of potential problems and did not like the outlook. The part of the embassy compound that held the vet office loomed in front of me in all its gray-blue human-sized glory, and not a moment too soon. The rabbit in my arms had started to squirm. It was all I could do to keep it under wraps as I hip-checked my way through the front doors into cooler, sanitized air. "Crisis!" I called out to the receptionist. "Inexplicable swarm of bunnies in the park! All hands on deck, 'cause this is a problem!" Jazzmeat straightened up in alarm. "No kidding," he agreed, grabbing the phone and stabbing buttons with slim brown fingers. "Go on through. Does it look alien at all? No chance it's some bizarre coincidence?" I shook my head, walking quickly. "Pretty sure it's a Jersey Woolly." He waved me through the doors, already talking into the phone. I took the appropriate hallway, glad that most of the doors here were easy to open without a free hand. Shoulder the swinging door, elbow the handle, get a better grip on the rabbit, then kick this one until somebody opens it. I tried to kick politely. "Hello! I have an armful of rabbit for you, with more on the way." Karina swung the door wide, her blonde hair tied back and her eyes wide. "Jazzmeat just called," she said as I walked past with the agitated rabbit. "Where the hell did rabbits come from? We didn't bring any." "I know. Weird, right?" I grunted, struggling. "Where do you want this guy?" She shut the door and unlatched a wall cage for me just in time. The rabbit was kicking free by the time I made it over, and the fuzzball managed to jump into the cage. I slammed the door with a little more force than necessary. "Sorry," I apologized to both of them for the clang. "Anyways," I said, straightening up and checking my shirt for pee. All was dry, but a couple of raisin-sized poop pellets tumbled to the floor. "Great. I'll clean it up," Karina said. "Sounds like you have more to catch?" "Yeah, there's over a dozen hopping around the park," I said with a vague wave. "I don't know yet if the problem is big, huge, or catastrophic." "Well, keep your phone handy," she suggested. "I'll call you if this one tests positive for any problems you should know about." "Sounds good. Here's hoping it's not pregnant or carrying a plague. Or fleas. We've been so careful about fleas." Karina agreed wholeheartedly, gathering supplies for her inspection. I bid her goodbye and left the room. Outside, I paused only to get a good palmful of hand sanitizer from the dispenser on the wall. I followed checkerboard linoleum to the launch bay, where we kept everything from catch poles to cage trucks. With a detour toward the vending machine that would have to substitute for lunch, I strode in with several energy bars and a juice bottle in hand. 3 co-workers had beaten me there. "Hello," said Reed the turtledillo. "Tell us about these rabbits." He was tall for his species, but only chest height to the 2 humans he stood with. His shell paint favored pale greens and browns in a pattern that was the equivalent of classy business wear. Paul and Anne wore the human version. "They are fast and numerous," I replied. "You know what a rabbit looks like, right?" I didn't think the subject came up much in Reed's experience as the lead person in charge of matching Earth pets with prospective owners. Reed nodded. Yes, I just brushed up on that section of the handbook. I assume we'll want the nets to catch them. Anne snorted. And some caffeine and luck. Guess my lunch will have to wait. She rested fists on wide hips with an expression that said she was ready to tackle the challenge. Anne enjoyed challenges. Her brown hair was shorter than mine, like the rest of her, and her skin was the sort of pale that wanted to be darker with just a bit more sun. She spent all her time indoors, solving problems. I will happily put off the sedated tooth cleaning I was about to do, Paul said, tugging on his favorite red baseball cap and going for the supplies. He had tan skin, dark hair, and a great love of complaining. I could tell that this crisis would get the appropriate amount of sass with these two around. We'll want nets and gloves so we don't lose a finger. You said they're in the park. Is that the one just down the road? Yeah, which feels suspicious, I said, like somebody's trying to smear our reputation. They'd better not, Anne said. She stomped toward the net poles in a way that said she wanted to threaten some hypothetical troublemaker with one. We can address that possibility once we've captured the animals, Reed declared. Let's get as many cages into the big truck as we have on hand. A fine idea. After a few hurried minutes of packing, we all clambered into the hover truck and hit the road. Anne drove while Reed sat on a booster seat and gave directions. Paul looked for rabbits. I shoved food into my mouth, fully aware of how short the drive was. The fact that my fingers smelled like hand sanitizer didn't bother me the way it once would have. This was simply the reassuring scent of professional cleanliness now. I had mostly finished by the time Anne found a parking space near the far entrance to the park. Several hover cars were settled into the neighboring spots with a handful of turtledillos there to watch as we piled out of the truck. Our clothes had the same logo as the enormous human-scale vehicle did, as if there was any doubt what our job was. The majority of the humans on the planet lived in this capital city, and the majority of those worked with the sanctioned Earth animals. We were here now for the unsanctioned ones. I lost no time in explaining that to the onlookers, to prepare them in case a little alien beastie rocketed across their path soon. If you see a small animal that doesn't belong, will you kindly let us know? I asked the assembled strangers. There are some lost in the park. They won't bite unless you try to grab them, and that's our job. The bystanders agreed. They kept their distance, though several watched as we entered the park with nets and cages. I carried one of each. The cage bumped my leg, and the net pole was a tripping hazard if I didn't watch the end of it. If only that was my biggest concern for the day. This part of the maze must have been designed by a different person than the other. Soft hedge walls with green, heart-shaped leaves rose high enough that I could barely see over them, and they made a barrier all the way to the ground. Smooth paving stones lined a path that turned corners repeatedly, as if designed to make people lost. I hadn't been here before. Maybe this entrance was the hard mode. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of claws scrabbling on the pathway ahead of me. I shoved the cage into a hedge, wielding the net like a broadsword. "Incoming!" I said, as 3 speedy fur balls rocketed around the corner. I actually managed to net 2 at once, purely because they ran into each other in their panic. The third one flashed past, and Paul and Anne exclaimed about it behind me. I focused on the thrashing rabbits in my net. They were liable to hurt each other if I wasn't careful. Keeping them above the ground, I twisted the net so they had less space to kick each other. Then I wrestled the cage out of the bush, both in the same cage or go back for another. As I thought it, Reed appeared with a spare cage. I thanked him, and the pair of us wrangled the rabbits into separate cages without losing either. It was a near thing. The big brown one was merely fidgety, while the smaller gray one grunted urgently at us. Not a happy sound from a rabbit. I let Reed grab that one, since his hands were tougher than mine, even with the gloves. Anne and Paul had managed their one capture by the time I turned to look. The feisty little white one spun in the cage, searching for an exit. We exchanged a collective woo. Reed and Paul took the 3 cages back to the truck, while Anne and I followed the path toward the meadow. A warm, cinnamon-scented breeze blew. It was a lovely sunny day, full of problems. By the time we exited the maze to see the field of waving blue grass, Multiple voices ahead of us chattered with concern. I was too worried about what might be happening to make any jokes for Anne about bluegrass music, which I'd planned on. We stepped out to behold a handful of turtledillos, all trying vainly to herd the rabbits toward the center of the field. A couple of them held fabric that looked like picnic tablecloths. Probably the kids' family, come to meet them as promised, and taking it upon themselves to catch the wayward earth animals. The rabbits were having none of it. In that moment, while we watched, a good half-dozen scattered past the tablecloths and into the nearest bush. Judging by the number of other bounding shapes, there were more in this meadow than I'd thought. "The humans are here!" shouted a young voice from across the field. Every head turned to greet us as all-knowing saviors. A camera drone with a newscaster's logo floated above. No pressure. We did our best, striding forward with confidence and net poles to coordinate the tumult. Reed directed our willing volunteers out into a wider ring to hopefully drive the rabbits back into a central area without stranding them in the open just yet. Other curious locals drifted in, and their assistance was most welcome. "This one's not running," someone called. I hurried over to find a large turtledillo woman hovering near a small black rabbit, which was indeed sprawled on the grass, panting. The white of its eyes stood out against its dark coat. "It just fell down," the woman was saying. "I didn't even touch it. Is it okay?" "Let me see," I said, putting down my net and approaching carefully. The rabbit barely flinched at my touch. I held it down gently, prodding for injuries and finding none. It let me pick it up. "I think it's just tired," I said, tucking it into my shirt like its predecessor. "And probably thirsty. I'd better get it back to the truck. Will you make sure nothing happens to this?" I asked with a nod at my net pole. "Of course," the woman said, taking up a position beside it with the alert posture of a security guard. I thanked her and whipped through more cinnamon grass on my way back to the street. Halfway there, I passed Anne waiting like a lacrosse goalie with her net pole while some of the locals tromped around on the other side of a bush. She nodded at me as I left the field. Back at the truck, I deposited the rabbit into a nice cool cage equipped with a water bottle. To my relief, the rabbit started drinking right away. I grabbed 2 portable cages and jogged back. There were a lot more where that one came from, and dehydrated or not, these rabbits were fast little bastards. But we caught them. One at a time, slowly and with great difficulty we caught them. Under bushes, in tall grass, behind benches, trying to climb low trees, and pressed vainly into corners with the hope that we wouldn't see them. They were everywhere, and they were fast, but we kept at it. By the time the sun was low in the sky, the wild chase had devolved into a quiet hunt through dark corners for stubborn holdouts. The black ones were the hardest to spot, though most of those had already succumbed to heat exhaustion and been picked up. The white ones were most eye-catching, and the brown ones didn't quite blend in the way they would among earth plants. That left the gray ones the color of shadows as the most successful players of hide-and-seek. "Too bad we don't have any good-smelling food to put out for them," I remarked to Anne in passing. "I haven't seen any bites taken out of the smelly grass, and I have no idea if they can eat the local fruit." She grunted in agreement, looking tired. I pulled a squashed energy bar from my pocket and threw it at her. "Catch!" Anne fumbled it a little, then laughed when she saw what it was. "Thanks." She didn't argue, tearing open the package and biting off a mouthful. I needed that. "Do you want some?" She offered me the bar. I shook my head. "I had one in the truck, and it looks like we may be done soon." "I sure hope so," Anne said, taking another bite. "Let's check that back wall again. We never did figure out where they came from, and there are plenty of bushes that could hide a hole." I agreed with this logic. We headed over, pausing to say goodbye to the first 2 kids and their family. I thanked them for staying as long as they did. The parents insisted it was their pleasure, something the children would remember for the rest of their lives. All 4 were there, a standard family unit in Turtledillo society, 4 children, hatched from 4 eggs, each named in the order that they were hatched, Primus, Secunda, etc. What with that and the 4 arms, the number 4 was a popular one around here. "Have a great day," I said as the family left. "Come by the facility for a tour sometime after things settle down." "We will! Thank you!" They waved and disappeared into the maze. That left the field feeling very empty since not many other volunteers had stuck around. But most of the work was done. Anne and I strolled through the quiet shade along the back wall. Trees on the other side were tall enough to cast diagonal shadows from the setting sun, which I appreciated, sweaty as I was after all the running and shouting. We inspected the wall, more of those same huge blades of grass wooden planks, though in multiple tight layers this time, with no holes that I could see. But Anne was right about the bushes. They covered a lot of the wall, more than enough places for a hole to be hiding. We kept looking. Anne jerked back in surprise as something orange flashed past. I reached for it, but it dodged and sprinted down the path to run improbably up the wall before disappearing behind a tall shrub. We stared. "That didn't move like a rabbit," Anne said first. "You're right," I said. "I have the sneaking suspicion that was a cat." "Where did it go?" The answer, we found when we pulled back the shrub, was, "Through that hole we couldn't find." The planks of the wall were broken here. By the looks of things, a tree had fallen on the other side and gone unnoticed, thanks to the bush. A stub of branch as thick as my rib cage stuck out into the greenery, smelling of cut wood instead of cinnamon. This was high enough for hungry rabbits to jump down from, but only a cat could make it back up and out. "Can you see what's on the other side?" Anne asked. I fought the bush, finally managing to push in to where I could stick my head through the hole. Twigs jabbed me in the ribs. "It's a forest," I told her, "or somebody's private park. It looks pretty wild." I'd learned early on that Turtledillo cities were more Swiss cheese patterned than the ones I was used to, with roads that wound between patches of private land. Regular folks lived in the equivalent of suburbs and single-story apartment blocks, but the wealthy rockbacks had little walled-off territories, some not so little. This one looked huge. "Are there any roads?" Anne wanted to know. "Not that I can see," I told her. "It's all dark and bushy without much that would appeal to a rabbit. Our side must glow like an oasis from over there. Wait." I edged forward as my eyes adjusted to the dimness. "Okay, there's the cat. It is indeed a house cat, no collar. Orange tabby, probably came from wherever all these rabbits did. It's walking down the other end of the fallen tree. Here, kitty kitty." I raised my voice in hopes of coaxing it back. Heads popped up from several directions. "Oh, crap!" "What? More cats?" "You want the bad news or the bad news?" I asked, staring. "What is it?" "It's cats and more rabbits. And a dog, and something with stripes in the distance that I want to say is a zebra." "What the hell?" "Yeah, and here I thought we'd get to go home soon."